Hello, Bede. Here we are on doing talk number 7 in a series of video conversations about Dhyana psychology, or the Vedanta Psychology. So we've been doing these series for a while, and we're now on number 7. Bede, maybe you could say something recapping where we've come to, where we were at last time.
Yeah. Hi. How are you going?
Good. Thank you.
Good. What we were mainly talking about is that no matter what happens in any one moment, we're always involved in a way of seeing. We're always looking at happening in front of us in a certain way, and this way of seeing determines the quality of our experience actually. And we were talking about that Swami Dayananda unfolds a vision of reality in which resistance to facts is not present. And I just want to make a distinction between what I mean by abiding in a vision and what they would normally term in psychology of cognitive restructuring. I'd like to just talk about the difference to be able to have a look at the difference, because you hear things like, if you change your thinking, your life gets better. You heard that saying?
Sure.
Now, changing your thinking is good, but I just want to show the difference between changing your thinking and what I mean by abiding in a vision.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Because I think some people may not really understand what that means, to abide in a vision. And how is it that through understanding that you're going to actually, as you say, abide in a vision? How does that work?
Yes. Yeah. Now, just to show you, just to come back a little bit, once Dayananda was asked, what is the purpose of life? And he said the purpose of life is to live. Mm-hmm. And then he said, but the big question is, what does it mean to live? And then he said a very beautiful thing. He said, we are living when we're alive to facts. Being alive to facts. And you see, when we use the word knowledge in the West, we normally think of information. But when I'm looking at you now, I open my eyes and I see you in front of me, Hal. I'm alive to the fact of a form and a name, aren't I?
Yes.
A form of color and that kind of thing. So the thing is that, so being alive to a fact is not an intellectual thing. It's not interpretive. Okay? Okay. Now, what happens is that when, let's say, for example, say you're giving me a hard time and someone says, well, Hal's, he's a bit of an idiot, but, you got to put up with idiots. And I go, okay, yeah, life is full of idiots, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put up with them. Now, that can help, right?
Yeah, I suppose.
Yes. But the thing is, it's not necessarily being alive to a fact. Now, I just give you a friend of mine who listened to our last conversation. He was telling me how all his life, when he's travelled on the roads in Australia, he says, all I've ever experienced are bloody idiots on the road. And that's all he saw. And the thing is, he said, now he says, what is happening is I'm driving down the road and I understand that everything is conforming perfectly to the order. And that people will drive as they drive, because given their background, given their psychology, their acts are going to conform to it. Given the limitations that human beings have, it can't be any different. And he was saying it's so different for him now, because all he's seeing is what is happening in front of him. He's not trying to look at them in a nice way. He's not trying to be good. He's not trying to think of it in a positive way. Mm-hmm. What he's doing is he's abiding in a way of seeing
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So you're saying that, in other words, it's not a matter of cognitively changing the way you think about things in order to make your life better or make your emotional state better. It's actually about really opening up and seeing the way things actually are, in a
Right.
sense. Right? So being alive to the facts means actually, first of all, accepting that this is the way things are and
Yes.
seeing it as it is and how it reflects a kind of an order of things. In other words, it has to be that way given what all the circumstances are.
Yes. Swami Dayananda used the term appreciation, appreciating the order. Again, you see, in Vedanta, it's very important to see what happens.
Could I say, are you leaning on your desk or something? Because they were getting a little movement of the camera. Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
So, you see, in Vedanta, the first thing is that we listen to a teacher and a way of seeing becomes active in us. Now, that's the first step. And we didn't decide to have this way of seeing. We didn't think, I'm going to think this way so that I can improve. What happened through listening, so being in a state of listening to the unfolding of this way of seeing from a teacher, we suddenly find ourselves seeing in this way.
Okay, right. So it's not that you're trying to make yourself see differently by adopting a belief system or an intellectual framework. That's the way most people are going to think about learning in this kind of way, or studying anything, such as studying Vedanta. That's the way we're sort of programmed to think, oh, I'm going to learn a new way of looking and understanding, and I'm going to get this particular intellectual grid and apply it to the situation to help me deal with it better. But what we're talking about is here, through opening to what's actually being said, to the vision that's being communicated by the teacher, you actually begin to see things that way, because really what's being revealed is the way that they are, but you haven't been able to see it that way before.
Right. Now, that's a very important thing. We discover something we didn't see before.
Right.
And what happens, so in other words, we become alive to a fact that is present but unknown. So when Dayananda talks about knowledge, it's very helpful to understand that it's becoming alive to a fact, that the appreciation of what is there.
Right. So you could say, and I think I've heard Swami Dayananda or other acharyas say, it's a little bit like Newton discovering gravity or the law of gravity. It's not that he invented gravity. He invented this new intellectual framework called gravity, but rather gravity was always there and it was being experienced, but it wasn't being seen for what it was until Newton discovered the laws of gravity and how it works.
Quite.
Right.
Now, so the first step is to become alive to a fact. The second step is this, and this is the life-changing thing, that once we're alive to a fact, what happens is that we can then, from that point on, shift and abide in that appreciation. Now, this is not an act of will. So with my will, I shift to the appreciation, to the fact, and then, but what I'm seeing is not a result of my will. I shift my attention to the fact that I've come alive to.
Right.
And
Okay.
then I'm abiding in that fact. I'm not trying to apply Vedanta. I'm not trying. There is no trying in seeing.
Right.
You can't try to do Vedanta. You can't try to understand. What happens is that, however, you can abide in the understanding once it's understood.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the big difference between, let's say, a program where I want to think better. I want to think, because that's using my volition. Okay, I'm upset with Hal, so I'm going to try and see him in a better way. Because
Right.
I'm then struggling to do something.
Right. There was an old TV show where this fellow used to, whenever he'd get upset, he would just start going, "Serenity now. Serenity now." So it's this idea that if you just force yourself to think, peace, peace, I will be peaceful. That's not what we're talking about at all.
No, we're absolutely not. Now, just to take my friend who's seen a whole lot of bloody idiots on the road.
Yeah.
Now, when he's seeing, that's a common term in Australia, bloody idiot. It's just yeah. There are other terms too that we get from American movies, but this is YouTube, so I'm not going to mention them.
Okay.
But they're cultural labels of how we judge people, and they have an emotional connotation. All of these so-called slogans or swear word type things have a connotation. They're a way of, you're not abiding, when you're caught in that way of seeing, you're not abiding in a vision, you're enclosed in a viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
right.
So when we look at my friend who's upset with these bloody idiots, is he alive? Is he alive to the fact that there's a bloody idiot, or is that a projection of his mind that he's taking to be a fact?
Yeah, no, it's a projection. It's actually a reaction. Essentially, he's vocalizing a reaction he's having to a situation that he just doesn't like. He's not actually just seeing the situation, being alive to what it is, to all the factors that go into making it as it is, or as many as he can be aware of. Instead, he's reacting to it and then putting a label on it.
Right. Now, let's just look at the structure of that reaction. Because you see, what happens is he's having an experience of himself as a complaining, hostile person.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as he's concerned, I am angry and upset.
Mm-hmm.
He's having an experience of the person who, this bloody idiot who's driving in a way that he doesn't like.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever we become involved in a reaction, the reaction is a way of seeing, which involves a duality of the criticized and the criticizer. Myself as a criticizer, as a resistor, and I'm looking at an object that I'm resisting.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of myself, I take it incredibly seriously in the sense that when I'm enclosed in what Swami Dayananda calls subjectivity, I'm not aware that I'm being subjective. I'm not aware that I'm no longer living. I'm no longer alive to facts. I'm sleepwalking.
I see.
I'm living in my own world.
You're not aware that you're being subjective, you say?
No.
Yeah. Right.
Now, the other thing
the thing is, because you're not including your reaction also as part of what the situation is. You're so identified with your reaction that that's not being included as part of the whole picture.
Exactly.
Right.
So my sense of myself, I don't realize that the angry person, it's centered on, you see, when we look at the magnificent thing about Swami Dayananda is that in the Western psychology, we look at an individual and we say that the individual has so many issues. Mm-hmm. He's got this issue, he's got that issue, got another issue. But Swami Dayananda has a unique thing. The whole problem is the unhappy or dissatisfied self. And this unhappy or dissatisfied self takes many forms. You know, I can be irritated, I can be confused, I can be angry, I can be lonely, I can be, I can be it has many forms. However, it is only one thing. It is a notion of myself as an unhappy person.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the most interesting thing here, though, and which we've discussed, is that when I open up and I invite the presence of reality into my life in the form that it is taking, and that form presence of reality takes up all the room, myself as an unhappy person disappears, as well as all the so-called issues that unhappy person, that goes along with the unhappy person.
Mm-hmm.
Because you see, myself as an unhappy person in Vedanta is considered an experience, not the reality.
Okay.
Now, Swami Dayananda says a very interesting thing here. When I first heard it, I thought it was funny, but I didn't really see the profound implications of this. So at any one time, whenever I'm caught up in enmity or any form of unhappiness, the problem is me being an unhappy person of some kind that I can describe.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is that this is like a mirage. And what he says is that psychology doesn't have the solution. That's the first thing he says, because psychology takes this unhappy person, first of all, not as a mirage. It accepts that this unhappy person is substantial. And this unhappy person has these various issues. Mm-hmm. But the thing is that if this unhappy person disappears, the issues are not there.
Mm.
The bloody idiots disappear when the person who's driving the car ceases to be an angry person.
Right. Okay.
And then he says an interesting thing. He says, psychology hasn't got the solution. Vedanta hasn't got the problem. Which is a profound statement. It sounds outrageous. When I first heard it, it sounds outrageous.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're looking at here is we're looking at that right here, right now, as I am, if I am being an unhappy person, then I project an unhappy world.
Mm-hmm.
It goes along with it. Everybody tries to solve the world, the object, because they don't see that the location of the problem is them.
Right.
And so what happens is that you don't try to fix a mirage. You become alive to facts.
Okay.
And Swami, go. You think it's
well, in a certain way, though, you're trying to address the kind of resistance and ignorance to facts, right? Isn't
yes.
That's the issue, so to speak, with the person?
That's very interesting that you say that. You see, fundamentally, the fundamental problem is this. When I become a reaction, I have ceased being myself. Now, there's a very interesting thing in Vedanta, is that when I am being myself, I can't help but be aware. They go together. Mm. In other words, I become alive to facts by being myself.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm angry, I have become anger. When I'm confused, I've become confused. When I'm lonely, I've become the loneliness. So it's extremely important for myself to become aware of myself, to be with myself as myself, and to become very familiar with what that means. In other words, to be able to appreciate myself, as a conscious person.
Okay, so that's a question though. What does that mean? What do you mean by to be conscious of myself? Because if I'm unhappy, I think myself is this unhappy person, this unsatisfied. I might not even know why I'm unhappy, but I just don't feel happy.
Now
And that's what I think I am.
yep.
So what do you mean by, you're saying that isn't actually who I am. So what
Yes.
do you mean by that?
Now, this is where the last conversation is so important, and it can't be bypassed. Here I am, I'm being unhappy, and I'm caught in reaction, aren't I?
Mm-hmm.
I'm being subjective.
Right.
Okay? Now, in order for me to shift from being subjective to being objective, the big point is, well, what does being objective mean?
Mm-hmm.
Now, and to be able to abide in objectivity.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this comes first, because what happens is that when someone is doing something that you don't like, and there's a refusal to accept the fact, there's resistance,
Mm-hmm.
of reaction is refusal to accept facts.
Right.
Now, the moment my mind is full of the presence of reality as it is, and that presence of reality takes up all the room in my mind, I find myself being myself and being aware. But if I don't understand happenings in the right way, if I haven't got this vision of understanding that everything that I am looking at is the presence of reality in the form of a functioning order, and it's perfectly in place, what happens is I react. And so events, I'm constantly being triggered.
Okay, I see. Now you see, it's interesting because some people who are spiritual people will kind of try to take the approach, if you discover who you are, that's going to solve the problem. And what you're saying is, really, you're not saying that's wrong, but what you're saying is that first what one has to do is develop a kind of objectivity to the world, to what's happening, including as well as externally what's happening, developing an objectivity towards one's reactions to what's happening. So then when one is actually objectively able to see the way things actually are, accept them the way they are, not because, I surrender, I'm forcing myself to accept, but just because you're being objective about it. This is the way it is. There's no real escape from it. This is what's happening. When you're able to then be objective, to allow things to be as they are and allow yourself to see them as they are, that's when who you are becomes
Evident.
Evident, right.
You become evident. You appreciate yourself as a conscious being when you are conscious.
I see, okay.
And you can't be conscious without being objective.
Right.
And you can't be objective unless the presence of reality as it is has come into your mind and taken up all the room. Swami Dayananda said,
which means seeing the things that they are the way they are, and that they reflect an order, right?
That's right. It's what we call receiving the given. We have to receive. You see, normally we resist, we push away.
Yeah.
But if we're receiving the given, just simply receiving it, not trying to be mindful, just receiving it, what happens is that when reality comes in and takes up all the room, we are lifted out of our subjectivity without our volition.
Okay.
Now, just to go to the wave. Now, Swami Dayananda says that there is a very fundamental relation of me as an individual to the whole. There's this fundamental relation that is always there. Now, what Vedanta says is this: it might be true that there is always ever present this fundamental relation to the whole, but unless I, first of all, come alive to that fact, and then abide in the appreciation of it, it's as if it's not there.
Yeah.
It's as if it's not there. So the very first step, Swami Dayananda says, we have to come into relationship to the whole. Because Vedanta addresses the conscious person.
Right.
And the idea we can bypass this is ridiculous. Because you see, when I become when what happens is when I am appreciating myself as a conscious person, then the question of what I am in reality will become meaningful.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? Because the analogy they give is that imagine this wave is disconnected from the ocean. Because he thinks he's a little pathetic wave and there's a lot of other waves around him. In other words, he's living in a subjective world. He's disconnected from the whole. So psychologically, that is misery. It's isolation, and it's a sense of loneliness and alienation, which is very prevalent in our culture. This hums in the background.
Yeah.
Now, if right now, right where he is, as he is, that wave comes into harmony with, comes into relationship with the ocean, suddenly that wave, as an individual wave, is transformed. Okay? Now, and so basically when we're abiding in a connection to the whole, through being objective,
right,
through being objective and then abiding in that objectivity, and we can only do that right now, right here as I am. But if I don't understand the whole, this reality which is appearing as trees and people and thoughts and feelings and, you know, the presence of this reality in the form of everything that is happening, if I don't invite that reality into my life, the Indians call this reality Ishvara, the intelligent cause of the entire universe. They say that but this presence of this reality is, unless this is invited in and takes up all the room in my mind, I can't be conscious. I'm dreaming.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. In a way, I was going to mention that, and I was trying to think of how to do that. That, in a way, traditionally, in the Indian teachings, this relationship with the whole is talked about in terms of Ishvara, or one's relationship with the totality, which is God, but not God in the way the West thinks of God as some supreme being that stands outside of reality, but rather as the totality itself and the order of the totality. And I think traditionally in Vedanta, it was kind of assumed that one had, as a preliminary matter, some relationship of maybe surrender, devotion, and so forth towards the totality, towards reality.
Yes,
as a preliminary foundational thing before one even begins to do the kind of analysis that is gone into in terms of who am I, right? But I think often for us in the West, I mean, for us, I mean, people in the West or people who are very westernized or secularized, we do not talk about it so naturally using this kind of religious sort of language. But we're really talking about the same thing in terms of developing a kind of objectivity towards the world, that the world has an order to it, and what our place and relationship with it is, right? That's the kind of foundational thing that needs to occur, that sort of sense of objectivity and the openness to seeing the order of things in order to really discover, ultimately, in a more ultimate sense, who am I?
Yes, because what Swami Dayananda says is that, you see, again, and I understand what you mean, the problem with the use of the word God is we think of it in Christian Judaic terms. Mm-hmm. What he says was that God, the presence of God, has to be appreciated as a fact. Mm-hmm. Now, this is extremely important because we're not talking about a religious belief about some creator. We're not talking about some cosmological principle or philosophical principle. What we're talking about is this: unless I become aware of the presence of reality, mm-hmm. and this is not an abstraction because the presence of reality is in the form of Hal, this computer that I'm talking about, the sound of my voice, unless I become aware of the presence of reality as the presence of reality,
yes,
I remain disconnected from the whole. So this is not in any way religious as we would normally think about it. We're talking about, at any one moment, me becoming aware of the presence of reality, which means that the presence of reality comes into my mind, otherwise I can't be aware of it. It takes up all the room, and then I find myself being conscious, and the fact that I can learn to abide in this appreciation at any one moment of reality, and this lifts me up out of my subjectivity. It's a magnificent thing, actually.
Yes, and the interesting thing is, because you are speaking about this in a kind of psychological, more secular sounding way, but you're really speaking about the same thing that I think is being dealt with in the Vedantic tradition.
I've talked to Swami Dayananda about this. You see, Swami Dayananda's psychology is based on the impact, mm-hmm. the psychological impact that becoming aware of this all-pervasive presence of reality, as the all-pervasive presence of reality, mm-hmm. what that has as an individual in terms of its transformation as me as an individual.
Right.
That's what makes it relevant. What's the point? You see, someone might say, what's the point of knowing reality? Well, you see, I am caught in, and we've talked about, an existential condition. Now, the word existence is an interesting word. It means X out to stand. So what happens is to stand out. So as an individual, I'm born, I begin existence. I stand out, mm-hmm. right? As an individual. And the thing is that because as an individual, I'm in a condition of alienation and disconnection from the whole. Mm-hmm. Now, what Swami Dayananda says, that alienation and disconnection has to be resolved first before we can understand the total vision. So what happens is that if I have a lifestyle that is a dramatization of this alienation or this rupture from the whole, and every time I'm in friction, I'm living in my own world. I'm not alive to facts. Do you know what I mean? I look at myself and go, I'm just such an idiot. Is that being alive to facts, or is it having a subjective notion that's turned into an experience that I take to be true?
Yeah, it's the latter. It's a subjective notion.
And what about all these idiots around me? Is that a subjective notion?
That's also subjective, absolutely.
And what about the world completely sucks? What's that?
Very subjective notion.
Right. So we're caught what he calls in a bubble. Mm-hmm. And so we have to come into relation to the presence of reality. Yeah. The presence of God. And right. When we come at any one moment, if I right here, right now, as I am, come into, once I've listened to a teacher and I understand what this means, once I come alive to the fact of what it means to be related to the whole, or in relation to the presence of reality, from that point on, I can come and abide in that relation at any one moment. And the moment I do, I'm lifted out of my subjectivity without any volition on my part, without any psychological meddling. Nothing.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So the wave, now I am an individual who is in relation to what is.
Yeah.
Now, my Swamini, there's the next step, which is what she calls the resolution of that individuality in totality.
Mm.
So as an individual, I come to it, and I don't know much about this, so I don't talk about it. But this is when there's complete freedom, because what we're told is that here I am as a conscious being. Well, what am I? Like, the wave is here's this wave. When the wave discovers that it is in fact water, it's not its name and form. It's not its identity. Isn't this individual wave, the look of it, but actually discovers that its very reality and itself are one and the same. Do you mean that the reality of the whole and the reality which is water, the ocean is water, and my as a individual wave, I'm also water, then what happens is this is what they call absolute freedom. This is the resolution. This is the resolving of individuality into totality. Now, what we are discussing is a step before that.
Right. So what you're talking about, what you just mentioned, is really when you find the non-dual reality, which is that my being and the being of the totality are the same being. The wave, the little wave and the big ocean, it's all water. The essence of it is the same. Or you could say the pot realizes that it's clay. It comes from clay, it returns to clay, and in fact, it always was clay. So that's the non-dual understanding that this is all leading to eventually. But what we've been talking about in terms of Vedanta psychology is the kind of foundation or preliminary steps that needs to be taken, which is essential and very important in terms of developing an objective relationship with reality. Right?
Swami Dayananda says it's not possible, that you can't bypass this step. Now, it is true that this reality, which is appearing as trees, as people, as cars, or whatever, this reality, that presence, you are. It's a famous statement in Vedanta.
Right.
But to see and appreciate what that means, we have to overcome, we have to go beyond the psychological duality. This is an ontological duality in the sense that the individual is related to the whole. There's a dualism there, isn't it?
Yeah.
But you can't just simply go, well, okay, I'm the whole, whoop-de-dee-doo-dee-dum. Because what we're looking at is that when I become conscious, when I become myself, right, I find myself being conscious, and I also find myself being full. That's in Vedanta we call it Sat-Chit-Ananda.
Yeah.
I find myself being myself. At the same time, I find myself being myself is being aware. I don't have to do awareness. It's not something that I do or have. And then I find myself, when I am being myself as a conscious individual, I'm no longer being my psychology. And this is, I'm no longer being psychological reactions. I might have reactions, but I'm not becoming reactions. And
right.
I'm building a lifestyle. And so we're talking about a thing of growth here, a movement from subjectivity to objectivity, which Swami Dayananda calls, what he calls it is emotional maturity. So this
Right.
movement from us living in the subjective world to living in the world of reality, the practice of that is called karma yoga.
Right. So, again, in a more traditional way, maybe we would talk about this as mental purity. But
Yes.
really what it amounts to is emotional maturity.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That's an important point.
Yes.
That it's not, mental purity doesn't mean some kind of, religious idea necessarily of purification in the way people will often think about it, but it means a kind of a purification of the reactionary psychology that we tend to have towards the world based on our strong likes and dislikes, right?
Yes, because I cease to be an individual who is reactive,
Yes.
who is as a resistor and a reactor, to being a receiver and a responder.
Mm-hmm.
Big difference.
Yeah.
And it's an extremely difficult practice. Now, this has to be acknowledged. You see, we're not talking about setting up a morality. You should be objective. I mean, it's just not possible. You see, I have quite a clear understanding of this vision of God. Now, does that mean, Hal, that does that mean that I don't come under the sway of subjectivity?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely not. Because you know how we were talking about the order? When my mind is full of subjectivity or subjective reactions, I do the same stupid things say and do the same stupid things I've done all my life. So the practice is it's nothing to do with the morality. In other words, what it does is it creates a dialectic in us where we're cognizing subjectivity and then shifting to being objective. Recognizing we're being subjective, shifting to objectivity, abiding in this vision of the whole. In other words, coming into relationship whenever we see ourselves being distraught, being angry, having enmity towards others, being judgmental. So often we don't recognize those as reactions, do we?
No.
We're just caught up in it.
Yeah.
So this is so important that it's a wonderful thing to be able to recognize, oh my goodness, I'm caught up. My wife, she says, oopsie daisy. We recognize we're caught up, and then we shift and we abide in the vision. And when we abide and we establish ourselves through practice again and again and again, so we become familiar with what that is. And the more familiar with what that is, the more clearer we are when we lose our way. We need the contrast.
Right. Okay, and this is really, as you mentioned, what's called traditionally karma yoga, which is this practice, really, or method of working with action in the world, with one's actions and reactions when one is engaged in one's life, right?
Right.
So, okay.
And you see, because what happens is that normally the human psychology is based around resistance to the facts of my mental life, my mind,
Mm-hmm.
resistance to other people,
Mm-hmm.
and resistance to the world.
Mm-hmm.
So the common denominator is the factor of friction. So myself as an individual am caught in friction. But when I am an individual, when I am being gracefully accepting, I can't help but be aware, and I can't help but be awake to facts. And this being aware and awake to facts is always the same. It's meeting things with sameness of mind.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a profound thing, actually, because what karma yoga does is actually frees us from subjectivity. But you can't have karma yoga unless I'm appreciating the presence of reality in the form of what is happening. So the presence of God or the presence of reality, when I come into relation to that at any one moment and am appreciating reality as that,
Mm-hmm.
That's what true devotion is. That when I'm devoted to, when I commit to and become devoted to abiding in this relation to the whole, and depending upon this relation for my well-being, I am what they would call a devotee in an existential sense, not in a religious sense.
Right. So we call it a karma yoga. We say it's a yoga, which is kind of normally means it's like a practice or a method, but really it does amount to, and it really comes down to an understanding or a vision of reality. It's based on it, as you've said, as I think you've spelled out quite well, an understanding or a vision of reality, of seeing that there is, that what we're experiencing is the presence of reality itself. And that means we're experiencing in our lives an order of things.
Yes.
Right?
What we're doing is we're seeing the order. In other words, the very presence of the given, whatever that is the presence of the giver.
Right. So the karma yoga really is the practice of returning, in a sense, to that vision, maintaining, keeping, and returning to that vision when we lose it, when we get caught up in our action, in our reactions of likes and dislikes.
Which we will do.
Which we will do, yes.
We have to accept this fact. We're not trying to be good here. We're not trying to be a decent person. We're not trying to become spiritual. We're just simply very interested in being ourselves. But we can't be ourselves unless we come into relation to the whole. It's impossible.
Right. It's not a matter of being judgmental about oneself and trying to be goody two-shoes or something like that. It's really it's a working path, so to speak. It's a methodology. It's a way of achieving emotional maturity.
Yeah, what Swami Dayananda says, it's learning. It's learning. Right. It's learning to be objective. And to abide in, but he says that without the appreciation, unless we are abiding in the appreciation of the presence of reality in the form of, we're not objective.
Right.
And it's an extremely wonderful thing. Do you know what I mean? Like it's the first of all, the discovery of the presence of reality as reality. And then to be able to abide in the appreciation of it is a wonderful thing, because without any type of trying hard, trying to get this, we use our will, because we've got control over action, to shift our attention to the vision. And then that's all we do. And then we're lifted up by the vision itself, which has been given. And so the whole important point with this is that Swami Dayananda said a wonderful thing. Have you ever heard sometimes people in Vedanta dismissing things as a term called mithya? It just means the parent universe. Just dismissing it as mithya. You ever heard them do that?
Some people will even just say, in a more crude way, will just say, it's just an illusion.
That's right. Now, what Swami Dayananda said, and he said, I never ever dismiss mithya. Because where there is mithya, there is sat. Now, what he means by that is the very presence of all of these forms that we're encountering every day, including our thoughts and feelings. That very presence of them is the presence of reality. There's not two separate things there.
Right.
And
there is no mithya, or there is no apparent reality without the actual reality.
Yes.
There, right?
And the apparent reality is the reality.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. So when we're talking about, and next conversation we're going to go into this, the nature of reality more, the appreciation of this, the presence of, everyone kind of knows, they say, well, everything is reality. It's not anything actually quite strange. The presence of reality is here in the form of various things: trees, people, cars, wars. It's in the form of all of these things. Now, so it's just very important for because our whole interest is human well-being. Unless, and we'll end this with this particular point. There's no possibility of a well-being that doesn't depend on myself, other people, and things, unless I come into relationship to the presence of reality. And that is not possible unless you listen to a competent Vedanta teacher who unfolds the vision of what this is. And then when you become alive to the presence of reality in the form of, you can then abide in that appreciation, and it becomes a place of refuge in a sense. It lifts you out of what we're normally involved in psychologically. In other words, the basis of all our psychological problems is like a mirage.
Mm-hmm.
It's what Swami Dayananda calls subjectivity. So we don't get confused. Well, is it anger subjectivity? Is it depression? No. It's just subjectivity, which is notional. And that subjectivity at any one moment, right here, right now, as I am, is resolved when I come into relationship to the presence of reality. And that presence of reality takes up all the room in my mind, and myself as an unhappy individual disappears.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Sounds good.
All right. So what we'll do next time, Hal, is we're going to discuss, we've talked about this presence of reality as the intelligent cause of all of the happenings that are occurring in our life.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're going to go into this reality as the material cause of everything we're seeing, which we're going to find has a tremendous impact on our sense of isolation. Okay?
Okay, well, that's intriguing. So I look forward to talking to you next time about that.
Okay, Hal.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
thank you. Bye-bye.
Like, nice talking.
Same here.